Hello, everybody. Today I am going to start diving into chapter 5, which is all about ethics and corporate responsibility and sustainability and super important things for all organizations. And I feel like it's interesting, so I'm hoping that you find that as well. So in this chapter, it talks about ethics, and we know ethics as our choices and decision-making processes that usually our moral principles and values play into that kind of guides on our behaviors and what we decipher what is right and wrong. And so that's kind of the basics of ethics. And I will try to give drop some hints on what will be on your quiz, or at least off the top of my head, know what will be on your quiz. But for sure, knowing what ethics is, you definitely need to be aware of that. So the goal of this chapter, really, I do think, is to present different ethical principles and guidelines for you. Maybe some different questions for you to kind of inform individual decision making as well as corporate organizational decision making as well. And it also talks about some ethical dilemma situations and stuff like that. But ethics is both local and global, and it really does begin with the individuals, and then it kind of moves to the organizational level. Okay, and then it'll reach that international and global levels as well. So it can be complex, but at the end of the day, I always tell my students, if you question if something is ethical or not, more than likely it's not. If you have to question it, so that's what I always say to go by. If you're having a question. And so it is, in your book, it talks about normative ethics, if you will. So that just kind of refers to the field of ethics that's concerned with asking how we should, or how should and how ought we should live our lives, or live and act, if you will. So just the norms of ethics, what we, in a general broad to speak, what a lot of people might consider what's ethical and what's not. And there's different types of values, and it talks about these in your book as well, that motivate ethics at individual levels. So, ethics at individual levels doesn't just involve the individual, but it's kind of a process. And in your book, it mentions it's kind of a holistic process. You might, as an individual, get pressure from other people. It may be coworkers, it could be, managers, it could be just friends, business culture, anything like that. And a lot of people don't love pressures. And as humans, a lot of us tend to work to avoid any type of dilemmas like that. Okay. So, and in your book, it talks about some different ethical dilemmas. And so just be mindful of that. It could be that, you as a person could, have these beliefs and morals and values, and you've been asked to do something at work that makes you question whether you should or not, because you don't feel that it may be right, but at the same time, you might not want to say something because you fear you might jeopardize your job or anything like that. So that would be considered putting yourself in an ethical dilemma, if you will. And so there's your book mentions some different principles or major ethical principles that can guide individuals and organizations. So there are 7 of them, and I do know for sure on your quiz that you will revisit them or need to be aware of them. But utilitarianism, universalism, which is more of like a duty-based approach, if you will. The rights approach, that takes more of a moral and legal approach. And then there's the justice, virtue, common good. I made some notes, so make sure I didn't forget any. No, I'm forgetting one. Oh, and the ethical relativism approach. Sorry, that's a big word. So that is more of just like a self-interest approach, and you will need to be aware of those for your quiz as well. And so it mentions in your book that how legal or ethical leadership is very important. And so just some things to think about when it comes to ethical leadership. Have you ever felt or been pressured to compromise your ethics at work? And it kind of piggybacks on what I just said, as far as maybe you've been asked to do something that you question's ethical, or maybe you see somebody else doing something, and a lot of times it could be your boss or somebody from higher up doing something that you question whether it's ethical. And sometimes we don't want to say anything because we don't want to jeopardize those working relationships or put our job at risk or anything like that. So kind of something to think about. But ethical leadership is very important. And when you read about Enron, if you weren't familiar, it mentions your Enron in your book, but if you're not familiar with it, you should look it up. In fact, I don't know if we still have the document, the movie, or the CD, what was it, DVD, if you will, on Enron in the library, but we used to, because I know many years ago my intro class watched part of it. But it is very eye-opening on how, if you have unethical leadership, how it just takes a domino effect and can really just take down a corporation. But since the Enron, it was such a huge failure, it's such a scam, that people have really been emphasizing the concept of ethical leadership since then. And so, it really can, an organization can really only practice ethical or have ethical practices, if you will, if it is enforced at that top level. And so that is super important. In your book, it talks about a value-based leadership, and it's just one that it's inspired corporate personal decisions, by creating like in common understanding, faith, probability, successes, faith in the ultimate satisfaction of personal motives, faith in the integrity of common purpose. That's what they consider value-based leadership. And it talks about what are the differences between value-based ethics and compliance in organizations. And compliance-based ethical approach is really simple and direct. So it provides a basic integrity to the participant, since it's just spelled out in clear terms. It's kind of black and white. There's always gray areas, but for the most part, it's black and white. An integrity-based ethics code fills the receiver with demands based on just the highest expectations. Okay, and so that's kind of the difference there. And in your book, it does mention ethical incoherence, which I think is interesting. Note, you need to know what that is. But when you have a leader that's not able to see consistencies, or not able to see inconsistencies among values that he follows, it kind of refers to which of these symptoms of the failure of like ethical leadership. So if he or she is not able to see those inconsistencies, I cannot talk, it is the end of the day, and I realize I should have made this video earlier, but that is called ethical incoherence, and you just need to be aware of that. It also, in your book, talks about corporate social responsibility, also known as CSR. And you'll need to be aware of just what that is in general. And it's pretty much just, corporations have a social responsibility beyond just their making a profit. Okay. And I know that is number one for businesses, but all businesses have a corporate social responsibility. And it's just taking responsibility for the impacts of its decisions and what it makes, their activities on all aspects of society, the community, the environment. And so a lot of, you'll see a lot of companies going green, making a difference on like pollution, and how their companies, whether it's, they have factories and stuff like that, and trying to just minimize that type of stuff. That's all part of, part of the social responsibility and them just doing their part. In your book and in the chapter or in the section where it talks about corporate social responsibility, it talks about the 3 P's that companies have, and it's the profit, the people, and the planet. Okay, so you can kind of think of that when you're thinking of corporate social responsibility. So obviously businesses are always there to make a profit. Even nonprofit businesses have to make money so they can run, like, consistently, run their business, be able to provide the services or whatever it is that they provide. The people, okay, who do you affect? Who's your stakeholders, and the planet. And so that kind of goes back to what I just said. So I'll keep that in mind when you're thinking about CSR, or you read about CSR, or you hear about it on the news, or whatever it may be. It also talks about, ethics around the globe in your chapter. And so what are some different, ethical issues that we might encounter on a global perspective, if you will, and just kind of surrounding the global environment. And some of the most common ethical issues that you'll read about include, like, outsourcing. You'll hear a lot, like, a lot of companies will outsource certain things. It could be their accounting, it could be whatever, because they can get it elsewhere for cheaper. If you have ever called, I just remember when I was in grad school and I had a student loan, I would call if I had a question. It would always be somebody from a different area, maybe a different country, that would be like the customer representative, because they outsource that. And so a lot of companies outsource work because they can get it cheaper somewhere else. But think about, working standards, conditions. That might be different. If you outsource work elsewhere, then it might not be the same as what you expect to see here in the United States, or just, wherever you may be. There might be supervision, oversight, human rights, religion, environment, corruption. Like, there's different things that we don't think of. A lot of times businesses, when they outsource work, they just think of, saving money. But there's other factors that go into it. I'll give you an example. And I'm sure that if I haven't done any recent research on it, but years ago, China was known for having child labor. And, child labor it's against the law here in the United States, but not in China. And so, we can say all day long that we're against it, that's terrible, et cetera, et cetera. But when we constantly buy from China, or, whatever that might look like, and I just say that because, I feel like everything says made in China, we are supporting that. We might not think it's right, like, hey, child labor is not right, but by continuously buying things from China and whatnot, then we technically, in a roundabout way, are supporting it. So just things to think about. Companies need to be more aware of when they do outsource and stuff like that, to make sure that they are, not supporting things that they would not be in favor of. So just things to think about. One thing I wanted to mention, so it talks about some emerging trends when it comes to ethics and social responsibility and compliance. And it talks about the Glassdoor effect. And I don't know if y'all have ever heard of the Glassdoor effect, but it is based from, and I don't know if you've heard of the company Glassdoor, but if you haven't, Google it. And what it is they provide like a list of position, or just mention a position, let's say for the company Google. And then like former employees will give reviews. It could be reviews on that position. It could be reviews on the company as a whole. But it's kind of interesting because a lot of people are just very honest. Like, this company's great to work for, for whatever reason, or this was the worst job I ever had, or it could just, hey, this was a great job, management wasn't great, but for whatever reason. And the whole idea of the Glassdoor effect, because we like to read reviews, right? I'm a big review reader. Like, if I'm on Amazon, I can spend way too long because I'm trying to read reviews on something that cost me $5, and I'm like, okay, it shouldn't matter that much. And the reason behind the Glassdoor effect is, the concept is that we trust people, like we trust each other more than we actually trust a company to tell us how great they are, right? So we're going to trust other people that have voluntarily written a review because they really liked something or they really didn't. Very seldom you get it in between. A lot of people either really want to talk about it if they really liked it or they really didn't. But anyway, so it's called the Glassdoor effect. And we just, we trust online reviews more than we trust companies is what it boils down to. And so it, also in your book, it talks about just increasing issues of compliance and governance to kind of ensure organizations meet quality standards and just meet standard ethics that they should. Losing my voice. And so just a few things to think about. I think one thing I didn't really touch on is when it talks about ethical leaders and it mentions corporate leaders and how a corporate leader typically will create, or somebody considered a corporate leader will create new ethical norms, if you will. And so that's just kind of something to think about when you think about terminology of what exactly is a corporate leader. Something else I wanted to bring up, and I was talking with some students, is that when we were talking about ethical dilemmas, we were just coming up with some different scenarios. And, one thing to think about is we were talking about recreational, legal recreational, and I guess medical, just legal marijuana in general. So whether it's medicinal or recreational. But I have worked at companies, just to give you an example, that they drug tested, right? And if you tested positive, and I watched some people that maybe tested positive for marijuana that got fired because that was against policy. But what about in areas now that it's becoming legal in more areas? What do you do? Do you turn a blind eye? Do you need to change your policies if it's something legal that they can do outside of work? It doesn't mean that you can make it legal. I mean, smoking's legal, right? But on campus, you can't do it. So, and I'm not saying make it legal at work, but do you ban that? Do you still have that policy in place, even though they can do it on their own personal time, as long as it doesn't affect their job? So just things to think about, right? So kind of throw in the ethical dilemma realm, if you will. I always like to throw something out that you can actually think about and make you think anyways. Maybe think of some different scenarios too. All right, that's pretty much the rundown of chapter 5. It's got some great info. I think it's pretty interesting, and it makes you think about some things that you might not normally think about, if you will. Anyways, thanks for chatting with me, and I'll talk to you soon.